Our next presenter is Dhruva Gowda Storz. Dhruva holds a BSc in Physics and Neuroscience from Maastricht University and a MSc in Artificial Intelligence from Imperial College London. He is a PhD candidate at the Laboratory for Experimental Museology at EPFL in Switzerland, Geneva, under the direction of Professor Sarah Kenderline. His interdisciplinary research focuses on visualizing and disseminating historical stereographic photographs through virtual reality. Dhruva has worked in a variety of roles at both scientific and cultural institutions. His lecture today is titled Democratizing Access to Historical Stereoscopic Photographs Through AI and Virtual Reality. Please join me in welcoming Dhruva Gowda Storz.
So, hi everyone, thank you for having me here. As Thierry mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate. I'm right now just about halfway into my PhD in the Digital Humanities faculty in EPFL, Switzerland. I'm doing my PhD under the direction of Professor Sarah Kenderline at the Laboratory for Experimental Museology, or EM+, in EPFL. And our laboratory is a transdisciplinary initiative at the intersection of immersive visualization, digital cultural heritage, interactive archives, and media art. In reality, it's always a bit difficult to explain this to my friends because they have no idea what I'm talking about, and we do so many different things. So what I like to say is we want to imagine what the museums of the future look like when we incorporate cutting-edge computer science, AI, and immersive visualization. And our bread and butter at the lab are 10 unique visualization systems that are benchmarks in the realms of virtual, augmented, and mixed realities. My PhD research at the lab focuses on stereoscopic photography. So what is stereoscopic photography? My first encounter with this was in 2020. I just completed my master's in artificial intelligence, and I was helping my aunt move out of her house. And she was going to throw away this little orange-pink box. And so I picked up this box, I looked inside it, and I found these strange photographs. I mean, these photographs were pluralistic. They were not like the photographs I was used to. They had almost 2 copies of almost exactly the same image. And along with these photographs, there was this strange foldable device that had 2 lenses and a hole for my nose. So at the time, I was very interested in virtual reality. I could kind of guess the physics of how this thing worked. And it turns out that this device is called a stereoscope, and it's used to view what's called stereoscopic photographs. And when you hold it up to your face, one of your eyes sees one of the images, and together your 2 eyes merge them into a 3-dimensional view. So I selected one of the images, and I held it up to my face. And I suddenly found myself transported to a snowy landscape locking eyes with a St. Bernard dog. And the dog was held by a man who was ankle high in snow. And he seemed completely unperturbed by the cold of the snow. Maybe it's a Swiss trait, I don't know. But the experience of viewing these images in a stereoscope was so vastly different from just holding it in my hand. I was suddenly in that moment. I could feel a sense of solidity, a sense of scale, a sense of distance. And it's actually really difficult to describe what it's like to view a stereograph without these poetic descriptions, which is why I've actually brought some here with me today. So I'm going to hand them out to the audience, and please pass them around.
You got some props?
But essentially, the way these systems work is, as I mentioned, oops, I lost my mouse there. Yeah. Your 2 eyes combine these 2 images. So Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was a poet and a big enthusiast of stereography, he wrote, by means of these 2 different images of an object, the mind feels around it and gets an idea of solidity. We grasp an object with our eyes and know it to be something more than just a surface. So this encounter gave me these two shocking realizations. One of them is I had grown up with 3D immersive media through red cyan anaglyphs, 3D movies such as Avatar, and these virtual reality goggles that were quite new and quite crazy at the time. And I thought that 3D was a modern invention, that it was a symbol of our technological growth to graduate from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. But I was suddenly confronted with these black and white photographs that seemed to indicate that this technology was much older than I'd actually anticipated. And the second big realization was that this was not just a toy for children or a gimmicky tool for science, but it was actually a serious form of documentation in the past. And after doing some research, I realized that it was much, much older than I'd anticipated. In fact, stereography was actually invented at the very inception of photography. So in 1832, Wheatstone discovered the principles of human binocular vision, and in 1838, he described his findings along with the stereoscope, which is a device for essentially seeing these drawings that he'd made in 3D. And just 1 year later, in 1839, the first photographs were publicized in the guise of the daguerreotype and Fox Talbot's first photographic process. And Wheatstone saw this new technology and immediately recognized its potential for the stereoscopic medium, and he commissioned Fox Talbot and Henry Collin to produce the first stereoscopic photographs of full-size statues, buildings, and portraits of living persons in 1839. So I just want to put this in perspective a little bit. This was invented 185 years ago at the very advent of photography as we know it. I mean, there was, of course, Niepce before this, but this was the first, they coincided. And they have a shared and deeply intertwined history. They co-evolved together. It wasn't until 1851 that stereography really took off as a medium. David Brewster had invented a portable type of stereoscope that I would point out looks a lot like today's virtual reality devices. By this point, a method for printing photographs on albumin paper had also just been announced. So at this point, stereography was much more commercially viable than ever. And these advancements also coincided with the Great Exposition of London in 1851, where Brewster and his colleague Du Bois set up a stand to promote their products. So this was really the birth of stereography as a visual medium because it apparently caught the public admiration of Queen Victoria. And this led to a massive demand for these products. And this demand only accelerated, and it became a really lucrative business, triggering a golden age for the stereoscopic medium. Soon, other opticians in Paris and London began manufacturing stereographs at scale, and the medium eventually spread to the United States, which became a nexus for the stereoscopic industry. The low cost of production made these stereo photographs widely accessible to the common person, transforming it into what could be argued to be the first visual mass medium. New types of stereoscopes and stereo cameras were invented, enormous manufacturing and publishing houses were founded, and many amateur and experienced photographers included stereo photography in their oeuvre. The popularity of stereography became so great that it even exceeded conventional photography for a time. At one point, it was not inconceivable that every household could have a stereoscope and stereographs at home. By 1868, it's reported that 40% of all copyrighted photographs were stereoscopic images. And by 1901, a leading American publisher, Underwood & Underwood, is said to have produced over 25,000 stereographs a day, which if you do the math is over 9 million stereographs a year, which is a huge number at the time. What I really want to communicate to you here is that for many people in the 19th and 20th centuries, photography was three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. This medium had a massive impact on the world at the time and on visual culture and the entertainment media that followed it. By 1977, William Dara estimates that over 7 million distinct stereographs had been captured, documenting a variety of cultures, monuments, events, wars, practices, and perspectives. We had extensive documentation of the First World War and other wars. We had scientific stereo views for documentation and education. We had microscopic, macroscopic, aerial, and astronomical stereo views. There are actually a few downstairs in the lobby, along with the Holmes viewer. They were also extensively used for travel photography, which is so-called armchair travel, which was popular at a time when traveling was dangerous and expensive. At the time, proponents of stereography advocated that through the medium, the sun would be the historiographer of the future. So David Brewster wrote, In the fidelity of the sun's pencil and the accuracy of his chronicle, truth itself will be embalmed and history cease to be fabulous. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "The time will come when a man, a person, who wishes to see any object, natural or artificial, will go to the imperial, national, or city stereographic library and call for its skin or form as he would for a book at any common library." So unfortunately, the stereographic medium eventually fell out of vogue and these physical libraries never came to pass, and it's largely forgotten by the general public today. But Brewster and Holmes' vision of vast stereoscopic libraries do exist digitally as a lasting legacy of the lost medium. Hundreds of thousands of stereographs survive in archives around the globe today, such as in these 3 archives, which together have over 100,000 stereographs together. Much of this material is digitized and can be freely accessed through the web portals of various archives. These digital archives represent a treasure trove of immersive 3-dimensional windows to the past that can not only let us explore history, but also have much to say in terms of media archaeology and the nature of immersion. So contemporary stereo proponents such as Sir Brian May, who some of you may recognize as the lead guitarist of Queen, is a big fan of the stereoscopic medium, and he has over 200,000 stereographs in his personal collection. He's trying to revive the medium. May has called for photographers to begin capturing stereo views again. He's revived the London Stereoscopic Company, through which he publishes stereo books, and he's invented the OWL viewer, a modern, low-cost iteration of the stereograph. But despite efforts from stereo enthusiasts such as Sir May to promote the medium, wider engagement from the public still relies on them knowing what stereography is and seeking it out, and having the will to purchase stereo books and specialized viewing equipment. The vast stereoscopic libraries I mentioned are free, but the format in which they are uploaded as 2D scans does not allow the public to experience the full affordances of these incredible artifacts, which you are experiencing right now in this talk. There's therefore a few key barriers to getting the public to engage with this incredible medium once again. I believe that virtual reality could propose a solution to this. VR head-mounted displays are direct descendants of the stereoscope, and their stunning fidelity makes them well-suited to displaying high-quality digitized stereo views in 3D. And they're also incredibly popular. Just last year, 5.89 million VR headsets were purchased, and this number is growing year by year, reminiscent of stereography's own meteoric rise in the 19th century. Amateur stereoscopic photography is even making a comeback through Apple's Spatial Photos feature on the Vision Pro headset, which I tried last week, actually. I'm not fully impressed. I think the old one is way better, but it's there. So to me, what we're experiencing on the one hand is an increased appetite for 3D media and photography, but also an accumulation of what is essentially digital stereoscopes in people's homes, through which digitized stereoscopic photographs could be disseminated. And there are, of course, other forms of advanced stereoscopic visualization systems, such as the ones at our lab, that could be used in a museum setting to disseminate stereoscopic photographs. So this constellation, to me, is the perfect opportunity to revive the stereoscopic medium. I'm not too optimistic about VR, but I feel like I'm an opportunist here. By piggybacking on VR's success and its increasing ubiquity in homes, libraries, and museums, we could unlock the vast archives of stereoscopic material and bring it back to the public. And this is what I'm exploring at our lab. So my laboratory, in collaboration with MIT and Professor Daniel Follia, have been working on a project that aims to reconstruct the Paris Universal Exposition of 1867 in virtual reality. The success of stereoscopic photography is intimately linked with universal expositions, and the Expo of 1867 was no exception, occurring in the heyday of stereography. In addition to being a fascinating model of the world at the time and a turning point in visual culture, the Expo was also notable for being extensively documented through hundreds of stereoscopic photographs. So we've collected 1,400 and more stereographs from the exposition that cover a large portion of the event, which we have processed and we visualize on our stereoscopic Panorama Plus visualization system. So this is a collaborative virtual reality system, unlike HMDs, which are isolating experiences. And what we've done is we've reconstructed the Universal Exposition of 1867 Palace and grounds, and we've geolocated hundreds of stereoscopic images on this map. But when I joined this project in 2023, it was already underway, I thought that it would be a simple process to disseminate stereographs through virtual reality. But it turns out that it's not. It's actually extremely difficult to do. There's a lot of pre-processing that you need to do first. To begin with, the form in which stereoscopic photographs are digitized are as 2D images. So these cannot be visualized in 3D unless you crop out the two stereo views. And once you crop them out, you may notice there's certain vertical misalignment between the views, and this also needs to be corrected. And once you've done these two things, you can already visualize them in 3D. So here are two very simple forms of visualization. One is a moving GIF, which some archives employ. And we also have anaglyph view, which you need special glasses. But these are really cheap, so it's a really effective way to disseminate at scale. But ultimately, both of these methods are far inferior to seeing them in VR. You have to see it to believe it. While cropping and aligning is the bare minimum to view stereographs in VR, the bulk of the work needed to prepare them comes from restoring damage. So given how old stereographs are, especially those from 1867, most of this material has accumulated scratches, fading spots, and marks over time. Unlike with conventional photographs where such damage is purely cosmetic, damage to stereographs can be so uncomfortable that they completely destroy immersion in the captured scene. And this is because your left eye might see a scratch in the top left corner of the image that your right eye doesn't see, and your signals are all messed up. And I need to remind you that this never happens in nature. Our eyes never see something in one eye that's not in the other unless you have a medical condition. So it's extremely uncomfortable. And also in the virtual reality industry, comfort has become a really big area of research because it can make or break the experience. And discomfort can even affect viewers' emotional responses to what they're looking at. So it's absolutely essential to correct this. So I did some calculations when I joined the project on how much time and money that this would take for 1,400 images. And at a very conservative estimate, if you assume 30 minutes per image, which it could take well longer than that, it would take 700 hours and over 25,000 Canadian dollars if you pay a student at EPFL to do this work. This is an enormous amount of money, and this is a barrier to doing projects such as ours. Even if you can get this together, you have to justify this cost, which prevents a lot of people from working with stereographs and virtual reality. But what I realized is that this cost just scales rapidly when we're considering the wider body of stereoscopic images around the world. Even cropping and aligning, which only takes a few minutes per stereograph, quickly adds up for hundreds of thousands of images. And restoring all of this material is completely out of the question, regardless of how amazing it is to look at. So this is what led to the ideas of my PhD. In my PhD, I'm developing a computational toolkit to facilitate the widespread dissemination of digitized stereographs through contemporary virtual reality. And my work falls under three primary categories: restoration, augmentation, and visualization. Let's begin with restoration, which I also already talked about a little bit. So the goal here, this is a project that I'm working on in collaboration with the EPFL Center for Imaging. The goal here is to create an automatic pipeline for restoring historical stereographs and essentially eliminate or drastically reduce the cost barrier of working with stereo images in VR. And what I've done is I've talked to imaging professionals, archivists, restorers, and I found 8 key steps that need to be automated to do this automatically. And to illustrate this, let's go through the restoration of a stereo photograph. So this is an image from the Prussian Pavilion of the Universal Exposition of 1867. It's a glass plate. So the first step, of course, is to crop the stereo photograph out of its scan. We then vertically align it, a process that's quite common in computer vision called rectification. And this is the important part. Once we have this, we can already visualize it in 3D, but we can also extract 3D information between the two images. So 3D information is encoded in stereo views by the difference between the two images. And this difference is horizontal. We can measure it. It's called disparity. And it's measured using advanced state-of-the-art AI systems, such as the one recently released by NVIDIA, Stereo Foundation. And what it does is essentially gives us a map of each pixel in, for example, the left image that tells us how much it's moved in the right image. And since we have the information of how much it's moved, we can move it back. And we can then directly compare the left and the right images by overlaying them. But you may notice that there's some strange doubling going on. And that's actually because some pixels in the left view are only visible from the left view because of occlusion in the right view. So we first have to identify this, mask it out, and then we can compare the two images to get what's called a difference map. So what's interesting about this difference map is that unlike other restoration methods that work with conventional photographs, it doesn't target things that look like damage. It targets asymmetries, because asymmetries is what leads to discomfort, and that's the most important thing that we're trying to target. A normal restoration algorithm may look at that black spot in the middle of the wall and say, hey, this is damage, let's remove it. But it's not. It's a feature of the image. So our pipeline is built around maintaining as much of the historical authenticity of the image as possible, rather than just removing anything that looks obstructive. So once we have this, we can get a mask that tells us which pixels to correct. And this is an important part. We have essentially two copies of the same image. This is both the curse, this is what leads to discomfort and asymmetry, but it's also a benefit. So we copy pixels from the undamaged image to the damaged image to correct it, rather than using generative AI and other systems. And this is a very deliberate decision, because you may say, oh, generative AI will do a good job in inpainting, but we don't know, right? It's a black box. We don't know how it works. So we prefer to keep the use minimal and always make it transparent as much as possible. Following this, we correct exposure. We adjust the horizontal alignment. Is something called depth budget. This is also quite important. But we also leave this open because it's also an artistic decision that some stereographers make. And finally, we denoise the image to address blurring or fading and improve visual quality. So these 8 steps are just a sort of summary of what we do. There's many other processes that I haven't talked about in the interest of time. For example, if you start with a negative, you have to positivize it. And also with stereo negatives, you have to swap the left and the right views as well. That's an important step that a lot of people forget. Also, you have pseudoscopy, which we detect, which is where the left and the right views are accidentally swapped. But these steps together, they give us a restored stereograph. And there's a few important design considerations that I'd like to talk about here. One is we want to release this open source so it reaches as many people as possible. Eventually, we wanted to work with all stereoscopic images around the world, but for the sake of my sanity, I'm only focusing on the 1867 images in the scope of my PhD. We want it to be modular. So if you don't want to restore damage, if you don't like any of the other crazy AI stuff that we do, you can just do cropping and aligning, for example. We want it to be a tool that people use rather than obligation to do everything, right? We also want it to be as transparent and reversible as possible, make it exactly clear where the pipeline has intervened and where it hasn't. We want it to minimally alter the source material, minimize the use of generative AI, and when we do, be critical in its use. And it needs to be built in collaboration with those who would benefit from it. So I'm always open to dialogue, and I've talked to a lot of people about how to best construct the system. So the restoration part of my toolkit is all about facilitating the dissemination of stereographs by eliminating this big cost barrier. But the next part of my toolkit is about elevating stereo pairs beyond their intended viewing format, exploiting the immense computational tools that contemporary virtual reality gives us. So a very basic example of this is AI recoloring. So we make these tools accessible, state-of-the-art recoloring models, which helps bring out some of the incredible details within the images, but also aids in viewing them comfortably. And of course, I need to say that the AI has no idea what the past actually looks like. This is a guess, right? But our efforts are not completely unsympathetic to what has happened in history. People used to hand color these stereo pairs. They used to poke holes in them. They used to print them on like semi-transparent surfaces and hold them up to the light. There were all kinds of augmentations being done. So we want our approach to reflect this and make it clear what has been augmented, but also pay homage to this. We're also looking at natural language processing tools because there's a lot of textual material associated with stereoscopic photographs. For example, travel photographs had a lot of commentaries that accompanied them. There's information written on the front and the back of stereo cards. So we also have OCR tools to extract this information, and we're looking at NLP methods to create multimodal linked representations of images and their text. We also offer tools to sonify text and images for more didactic presentation formats. And last but not least, our toolkit also explores the 3D reconstruction of stereo pairs. This is quite a natural outcome of stereo images because we know that depth is encoded and we've already extracted it in the restoration step. And from this, we can easily generate a point cloud. But cutting-edge generative AI and Gaussian splatting and neural radiance fields are getting better and better by the month and the year. And very soon, it may be possible to completely 3D reconstruct a captured scene rather than just viewing it through a window. And while 3D reconstruction is, of course, a big departure from traditional stereograph viewing, depth augmentations were also quite common in the past. So at a certain point, I think around 1880, it became common practice to curve stereo views to enhance the experience of viewing depth. And also photographers had all kinds of tricks for capturing images in a way that accentuated depth and manipulated depth in the image. The bigger issue, of course, is that here we're not being super careful about generative AI. We're asking it to reconstruct entire scenes, which could have potentially really bad implications for the output. And our answer to this is to always make it clear what is generated and what is not in the final output. Our hope with these augmentation tools is that it'll encourage viewers to engage with stereographs once again and help researchers and archives to build more stereo VR projects. The final facet of my work, visualization, deals with creating prototypes that demonstrate the potential of virtual reality for disseminating stereographs. Our Universal Exposition project is a great example of this. It'll actually be shown in the Archives nationales in 2026. So we also, in this facet, I look at giving virtual reality tools to researchers and archivists who don't know how to create VR experiences. So essentially, we're closing the loop and we're offering tools to easily port your restored or unrestored stereo images directly to virtual reality without needing to know how to do this. So in summary, I've introduced you to a lost medium that is historically important, fascinating, but also most importantly, it's just a lot of fun. That's why I'm doing this, because I love looking at stereo images. There's a lot of archives out there that I want to explore and I want to share with people. I've shared my hopes for virtual reality to be a vehicle for reintroducing this medium, and it comes with its own challenges, which is what I'm answering in my PhD. Through my work, I hope to give another lease of life to images that lost their capacity to produce wonder in their current digitized state and bring the stereoscopic medium back into public consciousness. But before I leave you for the day, I just want to contextualize my work in the age of AI. So in a way, my work would not be possible without the advancements of AI. What I'm proposing would not have been possible 7 years ago. Just to give you an example, stereo matching, which is at the core of my pipeline, is a really difficult thing to do. And dense stereo matching, where you get the disparity value for every single pixel, was considered impossible a while ago. So on the left, you see Raft, which is a method that I was using just last year. It's really good. We thought it was really good. There's still some holes in the top and stuff, but it's amazing. We can deal with this. But just last week, NVIDIA released a foundation model for stereo that's significantly more accurate and robust and generalizable than anything that's ever been released before. So these tools are always evolving, and my pipeline responds to these, but it also benefits a lot from this. And this also extends to monoscopic images. So, of course, reconstructing, no, this is playing. I guess not. Reconstructing stereoscopic images is a natural thing to do because they encode 3D information. But Meta Reality Labs in Zurich just last Friday released a way to reconstruct a monoscopic photograph into a stereoscopic explorable virtual reality scene. So in a way, I'm finding that you don't even need 2 pictures anymore to reconstruct depth. So this is going to have an influence on how we engage with photographic archives in the future as well. Well, it looks like my PowerPoint has crashed. I guess it was a really big image.
Approximately where were you?
I got it. Go all the way to the end. Oops. All right. There we go. And AI is also changing our relationship with photography as a documentary medium. I mean, we're coming to a time when we can't really believe what we see anymore. And this is something that I'm also extremely sensitive to in my work. I mean, if my pipeline is successful and is impactful as I hope it to be, for many people, the derivatives that my pipeline produces will be their first encounter to the stereoscopic medium. And I'm really afraid that these derivatives will replace the original. So for me, it's really important to always link back to the original images in my work, both in the visualizations to present the stereograph, to present the stereoscope, to contextualize it in history, but also make the algorithm as transparent and traceable as possible. And yeah, in conclusion, my work is only one of many to come that might fundamentally alter how we engage with historical digital photographic archives. I hope that my work serves as an example of how AI-based tools can be used and constructed critically and responsibly in the service of digital archives. And again, it's really important for me to talk to people, so if you have any ideas, if you have any critiques, please have a chat with me, and I'm glad to hear them. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dhruva. We have a few minutes for questions. Yes, please, Jill.
Just a very simple question. Thank you. Why did the stereoscope go out of fashion? What were the factors? Was it moving film or what?
Yeah, I mean, moving film was a big part of it. In a way, some people say it was replaced, some people say it evolved. Because film is also a form of 3D visualization, right? But through motion rather than through depth. And also, Jonathan Crary, for example, writes about how isolating the stereoscope felt. And when film came around, the illusion, the machinations of this grand illusion were hidden behind some wall somewhere, right? Rather than being very clear to see how they worked. Also, it was extensively used for erotica and pornography. So I think it lost public favor a little bit there as well. There's many reasons and there's many interpretations. So I wouldn't want to make a claim one way or the other, but yeah.
Do we have other comments or questions? Yes,
Thank you for the presentation. And I've been doing 3D work for 50 years, so I've got lots of ideas to tell you when we wrap up.
you might go for lunch with.
My direct question is, I do a lot of lenticulars which require multiple points of view. And is there an effective way yet to do a depth map from a stereo image as opposed to a single image, which I do mostly now?
To generate a depth map from a stereo image?
Yeah, using the points of view with the actual depth.
Yeah, so I would point you towards Foundation Stereo. Oh, it seems to have crashed again. Anyway. So Foundation Stereo was released last week, and you know this disparity map that I was talking about, that's inversely proportional to depth. The problem is you need to know the focal length of the camera and the baseline to convert it to depth, but you can make some kind of estimate, and you can do that. I think monoscopic depth is quite cool. That's probably what you're using, right, from single images. But fundamentally, they're inaccurate. But Foundation Stereo will give you pretty accurate values. Yeah.
On your website or some way we'll get a transcript of that?
Of the. Sure, and I can share it with you personally afterwards as well.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes, Diana?
I thought it was interesting how you pointed to the possibilities of the VR headset as this avenue for the revitalization of stereography. And I wondered if, I mean, with, you know, the pipeline you developed for restoring stereographs, wouldn't it also facilitate like the printing of cards that could be used on a physical? So I'm interested how you think, like, why you make your interest was more in the application to VR headsets rather than making the sort of just the material mechanical, I guess, early process available.
Right. I really like the mechanical representation, but part of my decision to use VR is also just my association with my lab, because we do a lot of this work. But also there are people already printing these images in books and creating physical devices, Brian May being one of them. And there's many stereoscopic books that are published that have little viewers in the back, right? So this is being done, and I don't feel the need to intervene on that, but my pipeline could definitely be used to improve this process and make it easier.
Great. Other questions? Yes, Francis.
So I'm a little afraid to speak because I left for a minute, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating something that was already said. But I have a couple of points and then a question. One is that it seems to me that you're not so much like reproducing the original experience of looking at the stereographs, like what you're producing or creating. Like it was like really impressive. It blew me away more than the original stereographs do. So you're doing something quite different. It seems like what you're doing is very much in the vein of like extracting information from the original document and then like representing it in a different way. And then the other point was that you commented on stereographs. You're commenting on their importance, and so you remarked that they that they weren't just entertainment, that they served other purposes. So I wonder, firstly, if you could say what other kinds of purposes they serve, because I'm not very familiar with that. And then secondly, maybe also I wonder if you could think about what other uses, or the way you imagine what you're doing being used. So obviously you see it like in a museum, or maybe like researchers at home, but maybe also what other kinds of researchers. And what I'm thinking is, I know there is like, it's kind of a thing, I guess, to think of older scientific archives that we can then revive and like process them, and then scientists can start to pull information out of them. For example, looking at like the history of climate change based on historical representation. So I'm wondering if you see this as having a use of like pulling the kind of data that is latent in these older archives and having scientific use today. Sorry, that was so long.
I mean, to the first question, I don't feel like my work really imposes any specific representation. So you could very well visualize it in the way that the old stereographs were visualized. I was talking to someone, an older gentleman actually, who had experience with these materials, and he pointed out that there's a certain experience of holding it up to the light in different ways. You could reproduce this in virtual reality. You could use the controller to grab a digital stereoscope, hold it up to your face, and reconstruct that, right? But my work just enables this to happen. I mean, the most important thing is that it's creating a sort of digital representation of stereo. And many archives, they haven't thought about this. They treat them as 2D images. What was the second question?
No, just like what kinds of uses did it have in the 19th century?
Right.
And are you aware of there being archives that might have different kinds of uses today?
Yeah, so I mean, World War I documentation was a really big one. It was also used for travel photography. But there's people like Flinders Petrie, who was Egyptologist, and he believed that stereography was like a very objective scientific documentation tool. So he used to document dig sites successively at each stage through stereo. This archive exists somewhere. I'd love to see it, but I haven't found it. So there's many such uses as this. And I don't know if you tried out the stereoscope, but what I find is it's quite an objective medium as opposed to photography, which leaves a lot more subjectivity in composition. With stereography, everything is more like here and now, right? So it was used for quite a lot of things. And I think your third question was about what forms of analysis my work could provide in the future. You know, I have this problem with stereo images when I'm using AI systems. When I give them to AI, they're like, oh, it's a stereograph. And I'm like, yeah, of what, you know? So by creating this digital representation, of course, you convert them to 2 monoscopic images, which then you can use for any other sort of analysis. And I've already got a lot of amazing ideas from the other speakers at this conference on how to move forward from there.